Hello and welcome to another one of these ADD videos. Today we're going to be looking at the different parts of the brain. Here we have a nice picture of the brain. We're looking at a lateral view and we are looking at the different lobes highlighted of the cerebral hemispheres. Up here, this is called the cerebrum. Okay, this is the cerebellum. And the cerebellum is going to help with fine-tuning of movement. When we look up here, this is also referred to as the teleencephalon. It's going to be the occipital lobe in purple here. The occipital lobe is responsible for vision and our perception of sight. Then we have the parietal lobe here in yellow. The parietal lobe has the sensory areas in it. This is the sensory cortex. Okay. This main division right here is called the central sulcus. Anytime you have a groove in the brain where it dips in, it's called a sulcus, or sulci, plural. And then these mountaintops, if you will, or these peaks, are going to be your gyri, or gyrus, singular. And when we look at this main identifying marker here called the central sulcus, we know that the motor cortex is in front, and the sensory cortex is in back. And there's little portions of each of these cortices, okay, the cortex is the outermost layer of the brain, that represent, let's say, your hand or your thumb or your foot. And they each have a representative portion of these cortexes, okay? Here we have the frontal lobe. You do a lot of your critical thinking, your processing future. Here we have our temporal lobe. Temporal lobe has the auditory cortex in it. That's where you process your sounds, like the sound of my voice right now. Hidden underneath here is something called the thalamus. The thalamus is part of the diencephalon, thalamus and hypothalamus. And the thalamus is the relay center to the different areas of the brain. All of the senses, we're talking about incoming from the outside world, except for the sense of smell, go through the thalamus. It's the relay center. Okay, so usually there's a neuron called a primary neuron that goes from the outside receptor to somewhere in the spinal cord, and then it synapses with what's called a secondary neuron, which goes up here somewhere and relays to the thalamus usually, or somewhere in the brainstem. And then there's a tertiary neuron which goes up into the brain. Okay, this is all ascending information and incoming. Anytime it's ascending and incoming, usually it converges the information. Okay, so when you're listening to my words, you're hearing a bunch of different words and you're associating them with meaning, and it's all converging to give you a logical train of thought. Just like when you visualize things, there's a bunch of different little stimuli that are being activated, lines in a diagonal fashion, lines in a straight line, circular corners, center lines, colors. All these things are being processed, but being converging down to, let's say, the picture on the screen. All right, you see the brain, and that's what you process from all that data. The brain is quite an amazing piece of machinery. It's 3 to 5 pounds usually of fat and neurons, and does quite a bit of amazing things. So make sure you know these basic structures here, and go into detail as to what each of them do. Know what main cortices are found in which lobe, and go through the diencephalon as well. Again, the thalamus was the relay center. And then there's something called the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is kind of like your thermostat, if you will, for temperature. It's the part of your brain that maintains something called homeostasis. And homeostasis is just kind of making sure everything's in check. All the different systems are working normal as far as the hypothalamus is concerned. So that's the basics, introduction to the brain and the brain regions. Make sure you go through this again. You'll probably need to take some notes, and maybe make some note cards would be advisable. And check out the other introductory neuroscience videos. I hope I've eliminated any doubts you might have. Thank you, and have a nice day.